We are so honored to be hosting Joan Silber, the author of Secrets of Happiness. She'll be in conversation with CJ Hribal. Joan Silber is the author of 9 books of fiction, including Fools, which was longlisted for the National Book Award, The Size of the World, finalist for the Los Angeles Times Book Prize, and Ideas of Heaven, finalist for the Story Prize. She won the National Book Critics Circle Award for Improvement. She's taught at Sarah Lawrence College. CJ Hribal is the author of The Company Car, which won the Ann Powers Book Award, and The Clouds in Memphis, which won the AWP Prize in Short Fiction. He is, for now, a professor of English at Marquette University, and they both teach at the MFA program for writers at Warren Wilson College, where writers are born and apparently friendships for life are made. The new book, Secrets of Happiness, has been getting amazing reviews, including this from Catherine Powers in the Wall Street Journal. Despite the unity of theme, Ms. Silber's stories are the furthest thing from didactic. They are rich with the complexities of life. The characters' motives and their decisions arrive out of personalities meeting circumstance. Further, the stories create a world made fully dimensional through changes of perspective. Major characters appear and reappear as part of one another's experience and testimony. It is a fine thing, subtly done, and truly exhilarating. What an honor to have you both. Thank you for joining Boswell's program.
Hello, everyone. It's very exciting to see all these names coming up in the chat. Hello, CJ. Do you want me to start by reading a little? Can you hear me?
Yes, and yes, why don't you read a couple of pages and then we'll start our conversation with CJ.
Okay. I'm just going to read the first few pages, so those of you who aren't familiar with it will kind of get the gist of it. And this is a character named Ethan is talking in this part. My father was on the road a lot when I was growing up, off to parts of Asia to oversee the cheap manufacture of ladies' garments. You couldn't stay still, he said, in today's business world. Ever ask him about the local babes? One of my friends wanted to know. You should go with him next time, Ethan. He was just being a smartass. We were 15-year-old boys at the time, obnoxious whenever we could be. My father complained about too much time away from home. He missed us, he missed New York, and always came back with great presents. My mother and my sister got silk scarves and pearl necklaces. As a first grader, I had a Kung Fu t-shirt from Hong Kong, and as a teen, I had crazy pop tapes from Thailand. Mike, my friend, tried to get me to gamble away my tapes to him in a card game. In fact, I had a crush on Mike, a skinny, loudmouth guy who was actually quite brainy and who had similar tastes in music. He was not my first crush, but I was still keeping those things to myself. It was the late 1980s, which were not as free as people like to remember. I lived in a world of heated imaginings, a long inner movie with a cast of highly appreciative lovers culled from real life, rock and roll, TV, anything. It was a happier world, of course, than any I ever really entered. I wasn't out till my first year of college. In high school, everybody liked to hang around our apartment. It was homey and messy with sprawling rooms, very Upper West Side and big for Manhattan. My mother left us alone. She taught school all day. She didn't need to see kids every minute. And then she burst forth at dinner, taking an interest, asking my friends the very questions they wanted to answer. Mike told her he believed in reincarnation, which I didn't even know. And my mother loved parties. When my father came home from a trip, she'd get all my friends to sing some goofy version of Love Shack. She'd have sparklers flaming away in a platter of pasta. Where am I? My father said. Is this the right house? He kept his arm around my mother's waist, beamed at all of us. My sister had to tell him every single thing she'd done in school. Home is the sailor, my mother said, home from sea, and the hunter home from the hill. My mother was always hoping to get to travel with him, maybe in the summer when she was off from teaching, but he avoided going when it was so hot over there. Over the years, his destination shifted as American outsourcing shifted in what he still called the rag trade. First, when I was little, it was Hong Kong, and then it seemed to be Thailand and Malaysia and Indonesia, and later China and Bangladesh. Every country is different, he said. My sister used to ask him about the languages. He could say hello and thank you in Cantonese, Thai, Bahasa Malaysia, which was almost the same as Bahasa Indonesia, Mandarin, and Bangla. Only hello and thank you, that's all, my sister said. Also, delicious and very good, he said. People speak English, they know we're idiots. Sometimes he took us to a favorite Thai restaurant in Queens, out in Elmhurst, where he traded a few phrases with the hostess, who always gave us a good table. The food was vastly better than any namby-pamby Thai food in Manhattan, and we bragged about it to our friends. Okay, that's it.
Joan, you've had this kind of terrific later career surge with 3 collections, 2 novels published since 2004. And you've garnered all these awards, and Daniel has alluded to some of those already: the National Book Critics Circle Award, the Penn Faulkner Award for Improvement, et cetera. But what's been amazing for me, I think, is been watching how your work keeps getting bigger, more insightful, more understanding, more inventive, and larger in scope. Even though they're not fat books by any means, but they just feel bigger, more packed with stuff. And I said this, actually, I was thinking about this in regards to Charles Baxter's book, The Sun Collective, but I think it's true about your work as well, that it feels genuinely and quietly monumental. Secrets of Happiness is kind of a tour de force. 7 parts, 6 different first-person narrators, several continents, a whole range of characters covering multiple generations. And I guess I'd like to start by asking, do you have a sense of what you're constructing as it's happening? What do you start with when you begin? And how, for you, do the parts start coming together? That's actually several questions.
Yes, right. I'll answer one by one. I mean, the short answer is I make it up as I go along. And in this case, my friend Myra, who reads all my stuff, had told me a story about a woman she knew who discovered that her husband had a whole other family. So the one was a neighbor. As she told the story and how the woman traveled to where the family was actually from, the irony of that sort of appealed to me. So I thought, I'll just do it as a story. I can just, because the thing about a story is you can always take a flyer on it. If it doesn't work out, it's not, you didn't marry it. I began to see as I worked on it that there were these other possibilities, and I could take a look at the other family. And then once I had the other family, there were all these complications. So what has been nice about the form for me is that it helps me generate ideas as I go along. I usually have some idea thematically of what I'm working with. In this case, it was both people having secrets. I think I'm not against secrets, actually. I like them as the engine of plots. I mean, in real life, it's insulting to be lied to, so no one likes secrets. But everybody has a few. But what I liked about this is I'm always interested in other lives. An early book of stories was called In My Other Life. If someone has a whole secret family, they're having a simultaneous other life. They're having 2 lives at once. So I kind of liked that. And the way if I followed out a path, it would splinter in different directions, which is always sort of interesting to me. And then, I mean, as I worked on it, I began to see the shape, and I knew that I wanted to come back to Ethan, the first narrator, in the end, so that his story could be a kind of container for the rest of it. Did I answer everything? What else did you ask?
Yeah. No, actually, I've got a related question. So because some of Secrets of Happiness, like Improvement's a novel, but it's structured similarly to some of your story collections that came earlier. Your Link story collection, Ideas of Heaven, Size of the World, Fools. And I think for Ideas of Heaven, I mean, it's even called instead of a collection, it's called a ring of stories. And I was wondering if you could talk actually a little bit about kind of the baton passes that you make from one story to the next, and particularly I think because the range of narrative voices, that you're employing is pretty amazing. You've got such disparate characters, and from multiple generations in different parts of their lives. So I was just wondering if you could talk about that maybe a little bit too.
I mean, that was a big discovery for me, that I could do it all in one book and I could do these different people. I love doing that. I think I mean, I shouldn't say this, but I always had some trouble doing a single line plot and keeping it going and getting the kind of, narrative drive you want and something like that. I loved doing it this way. I'm always interested in what's going on. One of the questions I've had recently, somebody said, do you like to eavesdrop? And of course, everybody likes eavesdrop. Who would say no? But writers particularly like it. But in a larger sense, I like the idea of everything going on at once. And then when I sort of got into the practice of doing these different voices, I just love that. I love knowing, you can go as far as you want to with this character, but you're going to get to leave them. It's quite pleasurable for me to think of all of that going on at once.
And just out of curiosity, I mean, because some of them are some of them make perfect sense in terms of initially, right? I mean, we start with Ethan, and then we go to his half brother Joe. But there's a couple where you start reading, you're like, wait, there's a little mystery about now. How does this person? I think like when we get to is it Rachel?
Rachel, yes.
We're wondering, or how does she fit in? And then we find out, right? I mean, the connections are made clearer as she narrates her story. So you've got, obviously the sense of some characters are it feels like direct connections and others very indirect. And is that kind of conscious in terms of, or is that kind of part of the process of discovery?
It's part of the process of discovery. I have to say, I know I have the freedom to make the links, not so strong if I want to. They can be a sort of, a little more nebulous. So I don't know how I thought of the Rachel story, although I guess I've seen that. Rachel is a character who, I mean, in the first page, you hear that her brother, who has been diagnosed with cancer, is being split up. He's in his late 50s, and the boyfriend he's lived with for like 20 years has decided to split up with him, now of all times. And I mean, I think we've all heard of instances like that. So didn't Newt Gingrich split up with his wife and serve his wife divorce papers when she was in the hospital? I mean, people do that, all the time. So I was interested, somehow that situation interested me. And then I wanted to get all of these other things around it. And then I probably figured out a way to get Ethan into it. So I'm really, I feel like I do things that I always tell students not to do, I tell students to, plan everything in advance and know where you're going, especially in a novel. And because I do it in this way, I don't have to do it so compellingly. It allows me to kind of play around a little, but it is trial and error. I do throw out a lot of stuff that doesn't work.
Yeah, I was thinking too, going back, I've always loved it when there's these characters who, are minor characters in one part and then show up and they're a major, like Bud gets barely mentioned, I think, in the Rachel section, and then he gets his own story. I mean, just this whole narrative, which is, there's a kind of delight in that. I guess I've known you for 32 years, I want to say. We met for the first time in January of 1989, and I've always been blown away by your work. You know, the novels and the stories. One of the things that's really struck me going kind of through all your work, and particularly in this novel as well, is your generosity towards your characters. There aren't, you know, even characters that misbehave. You know, and I think of, like, in an earlier work, you know, in Ideas of Heaven, I mean, Duncan Fishbach, who we see in one story as this odious character, and forces the narrator to lick the bottom of his shoe to show how much she wants to be a dancer, and you're just revolted by him. And then in the very next story in that collection, you know, it's him narrating, and he becomes an empathetic figure. And so there's this tremendous generosity I think you have. And like I said, you know, in this character, in this story as well, even, you know, a character like Gil, the father who's got two families, or Kirk, who's a bit of a cad in one way, but, you know, is an understandable character. You don't protect your characters from anything, but they all seem to roll with things. You know, I guess if I have any rule of writing, it's love everyone, spare no one. Could you talk about that for you a little, your attitude towards your characters in general, but particularly with this novel?
Oh, I love that. I'm gonna repeat that. I'm gonna steal that. That's a wonderful rule. I don't always do it on purpose. You know, I don't say, "Oh, I'm gonna be nice to Gil," even though he you know, he was terrible. I knew in the version of the story that I heard, he grew ill, you know, late in life, and had some form of dementia. So I had reasons to feel sorry for him. I mean, you know, suffering creates, you know, sympathy. I mean, it is one of my beliefs. You know, I think that, you know, we're all fellow suffering humans underneath, you know, whatever, you know, horrendous things we're doing. So I guess I want that in a story. I want to know. And I also, I mean, one of my, you know, bits of advice that I would give people is avoid the obvious. So if I'm going under a character who's unsympathetic, I'm avoiding what you already know already. When I first started teaching my class, I was teaching adult students, and they would discuss the characters, and they would say, what's the likely thing for this character to do? And I was like, no, we don't want that. And I kept saying, it's not the job of literature to tell us what we already know. So I'm trying to do that. I'm trying to tell the reader something, you know, they couldn't possibly already know about this character.
Could you talk to a little bit about kind of your, I want to say, I'll use the word, the authority of knowing your characters. I mean, you know, and it's such a disparate array of characters. You know, Ethan is gay, Joe is half Thai, Maribel is English. You know, and yet they all feel just so completely authentic on the page. And do you have a sense of when, you know, you're kind of getting your character, and that you kind of feel that?
Yes, in the beginning, when I'm trying to get the voice, because I always get it wrong. And, you know, it's this trial and error thing. I always get it wrong in the beginning, and then I'm starting to get them a little better, or I like the last thing they said about themselves, so I want to push it further in that direction. There are kinds of characters I can't do. I've never done, you know, the executive of a major company or something like that, or a very dominating personality. I don't know those people well enough or understand them well enough to do. So there's some, I mean, there's a range, you know, of what I can, what I feel okay, but it's definitely through getting them to say this and to say that, you know, that I figure out who they are. Even the responses to what's going on.
Yeah. Okay. You already alluded to the title a little bit, or at least half of the title, the secrets, and you know, there are plenty of secrets in the book, Secret Lives and whatnot, and I think, you know, a fair number of them come out, or at least, you know, the characters will tell us if they don't tell the people around them. But more importantly, I think each of the characters has or comes to some kind of sense of happiness, if not a definition of it. And I think that the word happy or happiness comes up once in every section. I mean, that kind of feels like one of the thematic things that's going through, a character talking about being happy. And I was wondering if you could say a little bit about that, because that very feels like a thread going through everything, even though their definitions of happiness are probably not be what a lot of us might say is happiness.
It was the mother who's been betrayed by this husband who's been, cheating on her for, decades that she doesn't know about. What was this sort of example for me of someone who's able to kind of meet the situation with resources and who is beneficially changed by the time she spends in Thailand. So that was a model for me, I guess, of how I wanted to do it. I'm interested in the resources that people have and what it leads to. My favorite description of happiness is actually the Bud character. Bud is this, for a lot of his life, he's kind of just this knockabout guy, but he...
Yeah, he really just kind of drifts through a hunk of his life. Yeah. Big hunks of his life.
What I love about him is his running way. He has parents who are the 50s and 60s version of the far right. They're in the John Birch Society, which actually still exists, but was sort of the one form of what we have faced now with Trump. And at first he believes what they say, and then as he gets older and comes into the world, he spurns what they believe. And he literally runs away from them and goes and lives with a girlfriend and leaves that girlfriend and, does this and that. But his life becomes more sort of morally active without us even realizing it. And there's one scene that I did enjoy writing where he's talking to his sister, who's also, right-wing in terms of politics. And because he has not behaved so well at a family wedding, the family is sort of under the, and his girlfriend also behaved badly. The family is under the impression that he's pro-union and he's trying to organize all the time. And he's still, I think, driving a cab at that point. He's not doing anything political. But he lies and says, oh yeah, I work for the union, because he has a friend who does. His friend works for the hospital workers union. And his lie gets him into actually doing it. He finally, has his friend get him a job. And then his life goes on in a slightly better direction. And at the very end of his story, he's working for an NGO in Cambodia, which has a lot of NGOs and kind of help organizations. And Rachel, his old girlfriend, has been Skyping him fondly. He's quite happy. And he loves where he is and he loves what he's doing. And he thinks of himself he's on the Mekong, and he looks out and thinks, I'm on this ancient waterway and, everything's, proud of what I do. And I have this girlfriend. And he says, if I could talk to my father again, his father being this sort of crummy person who's not even alive anymore, he says, I would tell him I couldn't ask for more than I have. And I mean, I love that sentiment, which I sometimes have at, great moments, but it's also in other parts of the book, people are in some ways being counseled against greed. I mean, the infidelities are a form of greed, right? Of asking for more than it's a good idea to think you should have. So there's some of that in the idea of happiness as well.
Yeah, you've got actually, people have seen the book. I mean, the gold on the cover. One of the things that appears as actually with a monetary value, because it's a rare first edition, is the book Treasure Island, right? Which is all about greed, and it appears in I think the two Ethan sections. So, was that just kind of a happy instance of finding a book that kind of serves as a objective correlative, or that ties things together that way?
I had Stevenson already. When the mother says, "Home is the hunter, home from the hill," that's a Stevenson poem. I did not have Treasure Island in the first chapter, and it is an example of my great editor, Dan Smetanka, advising me to put Treasure Island in there. So that's good editing.
So yeah, so it's because it really does, when it comes back again, you're like, oh, as you have that something else that kind of runs through the book. I mean, actually, I think more than just like at the beginning and the end as bookends is the whole notion of, I don't think it's spelled out this way, but notice the amount of caretaking that happens, and often people who are end up being caretakers for people who they wouldn't normally think they would be. Knock in Ethan's chapter, the other woman, and later Ethan himself is taking care of his ex-lover Saul. And there's a few other instances like that. I mean, there's just that sense of selflessness, I think, that kind of runs through the book as well.
I think it also is what is thrown at them. I mean, if someone is in need and you can take care of them, people often will. I mean, I certainly have seen quite a bit of that.
I've heard you, have had the pleasure of hearing you give classes and hearing some of your class lectures over the years. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how aspects of your own thinking about story find their way into the novel. I'm thinking, for example, about how time plays out in this novel, how you move through time pretty effortlessly, although we're jumping around in years depending on whose story we're in.
I think of myself as someone who's not that good at doing a standard kind of time frame. I really want to. I'm happier when I'm covering longer periods of time, and I think that I was uncomfortable for many years with older models of moving. That you have to prepare things and you have to move gradually and you have to get there in certain ways. That I wasn't doing my best work under that, provision. And I love the idea also because I am older. I love the idea of seeing how things play out over the course of time. So that's been pleasurable for me to do. And I'm perfectly comfortable doing it. I'm perfectly happy to say, for 10 years he did this and then he did that. I don't have any scruples against, leaping across stuff.
Right. I mean, I think of like, when Ethan, I think, is talking about one of his earlier loves, pre-Kirk. He's talking about Tony, and he talks about, he says, and then 10 years went by. I mean, it's just, in a sentence, you're just, it's like that Alice Munro sort of, we'll just cut those years out because things were just kind of slowly going downhill, and it's condensed. The thing too I was struck by is how much these narrators really do kind of tell their stories. I mean, there's plenty of scenes. It's but you certainly lean, I think, more towards the idea of these narrators as being storytellers, that they are taking kind of the long view of their lives. And again, is that kind of a conscious thing on your part that there's that sense that they want to be able to kind of take stock over time?
Well, there's two parts of that. I think I want to talk about how people talk to themselves about what they're doing. And in fact, one of the things that I always love about Dickens, who makes a few appearances in this book, is how he knows the slogans that people live by, the phrases that they use to explain to themselves, what's happening. So I wanted to get that. I wanted to get how they would speak about, what their interior, kind of phrases are for what they do. And I also, what was the second part of the question? I just lost track of what I was saying.
That idea of telling,
right.
Taking stock, as they.
Yes, I know, because I came of age when writers are always told, show, don't tell. And not only did I never quite know what that was, but I thought, oh no, sometimes I like telling. So that was another sort of change that came over me once I started doing this particular kind of composite way of doing it. I felt comfortable having the characters sort of tell about themselves, and I like that. I think the telling is useful in conveying, who the character is and what's important.
Yeah. Oops, you froze just a little bit. I hope it's just a momentary thing. I was thinking actually as you were talking about that,
my connection.
that I was thinking the old Richard Russo observation that we're storytellers, not story showers, and I think there's that aspect of what you're doing that almost, even though these are first person narrators, there's, and they're very much rooted in their perspective. When you take it as a kind of collective, it almost feels like there's a kind of omniscience that holds, controlling intelligence that holds the whole thing together, which I find delightful. I mean, there's that sense of we're kind of getting a sense of this much larger world because we're hearing these individual voices.
I love Rick's lecture on omniscience, actually, now that you say that. One thing that I always say about this form, and forgive me, people in the audience who've heard me say it before, but I always want it to be big and small at the same time. And my natural inclination is towards the very close interior moment. And so using all these different narrators gave me a way to expand that and to give the sense that I'm speaking on a larger canvas, to mix metaphors. I'm painting on a larger canvas.
Yeah. Well, and I'm thinking too, as you move from one book to the next, like Improvement had first person narrators, but it also has a large sections that are third person. And so in this one, you made the decision to go with all different first person voices. And was that kind of a conscious thing at the beginning, or was it something you just kind of found your way into as you were doing it, as you were discovering each of the characters?
They're not that different to me. I mean, close third and first are pretty similar to me. I think that, in fact, I thought these were going to be stories. I didn't think they were going to be a novel at first. I was, at the time I began it, I felt a little discouraged about Improvement. And I thought that it was before it had come out. I didn't know it was going to do well. And I thought, oh, I'll go back to doing stories. I love stories. And the stories were always in the I form, the more recent stories. So that was one thing that swayed me in that direction. And the I may come a little more easily to me, but I don't see it as a huge difference, to be perfectly honest.
Just out of curiosity, because I'm kind of wondering, you're conscious of some of these being like a ring of stories, and this being a novel, but the techniques are a little similar. Do you have an idea in your head in terms of how you distinguish from one to the other?
Well, I'm trying to make them more unified. I mean, I do think these last books are more unified than the stories, although I feel like they're all part of a continuing project in a way. But I, because they're, the beginning and the ending sort of hold them up, there's a container. Mm-hmm. It's trying to get them to match a little bit more and to have a little bit more suspense. I mean, Improvement has a definite thing where there's a death in the beginning and we don't quite know how it's going to, play itself out in the end. And this too, we don't quite know how how the original family is going to fare finally. So I'm trying to use that. I think if it were up to me, I'm not sure that I would have them called anything. I don't care whether they're called novels and reviews some reviews will refer to this as a linked story collection or some. The only phrase I don't particularly like is novel in stories. I don't hate it, but it sounds a little, I don't know, it sounds a little different than what I do. It sounds as if they're a little more unitized in that description. But I feel like it's just what I do at this point, rather than having a name as a form.
Yeah, I always like the way Tim O'Brien called, I think the things they carried. Wasn't called a novel. It wasn't called a collection of stories. It was called a work of fiction,
Oh,
which I think is just great. Just a work of fiction. And Laura Tupper, actually, somebody who has been doing terrific work recently herself, and we both know from Warren Wilson, asks, she wonders if both of us could talk about titles. You've already talked a little bit about the title specific for this one, but how do they come? She wants to know kind of more in general. How do they come to you? Early, late? Do they help you to frame your stories, or do they occur to you after the fact?
all of the above. It really, there's no single way. Some secrets of happiness I thought of after I finished the first chapter. And it was published separately as a story under that title. Improvement, I thought of long after I had finished it. It just really depends. I think titles are hard. And also you are really, you're guiding people by doing that, right? So I don't have to do it, CJ. What's your method?
Yes, all of the above. For the company car, I knew that was going to be the title early on. For my first novel, I actually went around with sheets of paper with different possible titles on, and just listings of possible titles, probably 20 or 25 on the paper, and I'd read them to my friends and horrify them with some of the terrible titles where I just did not have an idea for what that one was going to be. And I think it does sometimes happen that the title shows up. I think often it's more a case of somewhere along the way I start to feel like what the title might be. At least that. So I don't have a set formula or anything, for it. Would that it was that easy, right? One from column A, one from column B.
Yeah.
If your birth month is, X, the title, that you have to start with an article or something. We're actually at probably a good place. It's 22. I've got a few more questions, but I want to open it up. Laura's gotten us started. If people do have questions, please put them in the chat or in the Q&A, whichever, and we'll get to them. I'll be monitoring that. I was wondering if you could say, you've been teaching for many years, and you've stepped back from university teaching, at least at Sarah Lawrence. So congratulations on that. You're still teaching at Warren Wilson. What does teaching mean for your writing and for your thinking about writing? How do you, it's a different part of your brain? Is it, do you feel a great sense of a burden being lifted with doing teaching a little less now, or does it not matter?
What I loved about teaching was the people I met. Actually, I love my students. I did learn a lot about form from it, because when you're teaching, it's always a matter of how am I going to articulate, what this story's missing? What do I say? So I feel like I developed a sense of form through looking at student stories. And in fact, because I did everything backwards, I had written, a novel or two before I started teaching, probably just one novel, and really learned about stories through teaching them. So I think I learned a lot about structure through having to examine student work. I don't miss it now because I'm happy to have more time. Time is passing by no matter what. I want to be able to, use what time I have left. But I loved it. I learned a huge amount doing it. And I feel like I matured intellectually through having to articulate stuff about, I always had opinions, but and loved my own opinions, but I had to really think them through more closely. And I think that all of that came about through teaching.
Yeah, I always found that, having to, ended up kind of teaching myself so much by reading student work and to some extent reverse engineering it. Kind of thinking about, what do I think the intent is here? And then not only do I help, that writer imagine how they might possibly get there or better realize that intent, but also how can I make sure that the other students in the class, particularly if you're working with undergraduates, how can the other students in the class also get something out of the exercise? So it was always, I think you're right, that kind of sense of reverse engineering things.
He's a great teacher and he just got a big award for it. What's your award called?
Oh, the Robert and Mary Gettle Teaching Excellence Award.
It's excellent. Excellent.
Yeah. I'll put the link to my acceptance speech in the. I won't. I won't. But anyway, but I talk about teaching and writing and a lot in my thank you. I kind of feel like I've learned a tremendous amount from that. The other thing that I would think been similar for you as well is how much I've learned going to Warren Wilson all these years. Officially we're faculty, but if anybody has been in that program, knows the faculty all come to each other's classes, and we come not just as out of show of support, but because our educations get to continue. I learned tremendous amounts from my colleagues who are saying really smart things.
The other thing about teaching is that in some ways it stabilizes your life as a writer. As CJ knows, because he's known me since Tosh, his oldest, was a baby, 32 years. I've had a very up-down career. I had, after my second book, there were 13 years when I could not get a book published. And then I slowly climbed my way back. So the teaching is the kind of steadying influence in all this time. You're talking about writing, you're leading a life as a writer. And certainly I was still writing, no matter what was going on. But all of that helps. I felt like it was supporting me, both materially and otherwise.
Yeah. And I know you started, because I read an interview with you about this, that back when improvement was, kind of starting to come to fruition, you were already starting some of the work on Secrets of Happiness. And where are you now with, kind of what's next?
I am starting chapter 3 on a new book. I'm not sure quite what shape 1 and 2 are in, but I'm moving forward. And it's actually a book that involves regret. The character who begins it is someone who betrayed a friend when they were both young, drug users. So that's, I'm having, and it's very good for me. I mean, it's obviously when I'm in the midst of doing work for the book that's out now, I can't sit down and write every day, but when I can, it's very good for me. It roots me.
Speaking of rootedness, I mean, most of the stories, most of the narrators, not all the narrators, but most of the narrators in Secrets of Happiness are New Yorkers of one stripe or another, living in one part. But the action actually takes place, across, and events take place across, multiple continents and a whole host of countries: Nepal, Thailand, Cambodia, England. It's kind of amazing the kind of casual sweep, that you're able to incorporate. What kind of research do you do for? I know you travel a fair amount, but can you talk a little bit about the process of that, of evoking a sense of place, and how you make places that aren't familiar to probably a lot of us feel intimate and alive?
I love doing research. I mean, also research is easier than writing, so it's it's always fun to do. But for instance, in this, I've been to Thailand many times, not for huge amounts of time, but I've gone often. There's a scene that takes place in a police station in Bangkok. I have never been in, fortunately, I've never been in a police station in Bangkok, but many foreigners who have had run-ins with the Thai police have. So you have only to Google online, and you will. I'm pretty good at, at figuring out what to ask, but it's not very hard. But there's lots of accounts. I got a sense of what they looked like. What were the outfits that they'd have to wear. I don't know that everything I did was totally right. I can't claim that, but it enabled me to imagine something that is not within my own experience. The character who's narrating is just visiting. He's not a
Right.
person himself.
Right.
But I was able to do that. So I love doing that research. The only place I haven't been to in this particular book is Nepal, because I was hoping to go this fall. But I had been reading a lot about it before going. Many people who were in Kathmandu in 1970 have written about it. I have read lots of books about that. And I had one friend who took what's called the Overland Trail from Europe across to Nepal. So I kind of quizzed him. So I love doing that. That's really, really fun for me. I think that the trick with research is not putting in too much. Figuring out what details your character would care about, not just what you as author would care about, but what the character would notice and what would be important to them.
It's about 10 minutes to the hour. If people have questions, put them in the chat or in the Q&A. One more question I actually had that I'm curious about is just kind of your bravery in imagining these different characters who are very much different from you, and there's I know kind of a big push to write what you know and to have to not kind of cross certain boundaries, and you seem to be able to do that with a tremendous amount of facility. And can you say a little bit about that?
Mostly emotionally, I do know. So I'm in this book, the controversial character would maybe be Joe because he's half Thai, but I put him in Queens. I've been to Queens many times. He's a New York kid. I did do research, but so I'm trying to maneuver it in a way that will make sense to me emotionally when I'm doing him. So far, I haven't been attacked in either book for going too far outside my own ken. But I'm pretty careful, not to step beyond a certain point, I think. And emotionally, I talked to a group in Australia and they said, oh, talk about Bud. He's the most unlike you. How did you get to? I am totally like Bud. I mean, his away, his wandering around, his meandering from job to job. I mean, he and I have a lot more in common than maybe a person who doesn't know me well would think. So usually there really is, there's a point of contact that, I feel comfortable with.
Good, thank you. Somebody had asked to put the link to purchase, and I hope I copied it correctly. Dan will probably come back in, Dan Golden, owner of Boswell Books, who's just an absolute peach of a human being. And he'll probably come in here in just a minute to wind things down. But before that happens, Sarah Stone has asked if we could talk a little about what we've both been reading and loving recently.
Oh, I'm often reading something that has to do with what I'm writing next. So probably nobody else is reading a book called The Social Life of Opium in China, but it's pretty good. My favorite books of the past year were Margot's book and Charlie's book. Margot Livesey, The Boy in the Field.
The Boy in the Field.
Yeah. And Charles Baxter, The Sun Collective. They're both amazing books. Charles, what are you reading, CJ?
I'm a terrible person in terms of reading often having a couple books going on at the same time, so one of them has been this, of course, but I've also been reading Anna Solomon's The Book of V, and I just got so I'm just a few pages into it, but I've loved her other work, Marissa Silver's why am I drawing up The Mysteries, and then a book that my daughter-in-law gave me to give me more background about racial injustice, The Color of Law, which has just been a fascinating book. I mean, it's things that I kind of knew, but to just find out how systemic, a word people sometimes don't like to hear, systemic the racism has been, how much it's been baked into our law. Anyway, that's been a fascinating nonfiction book I've been reading.
Another recent book that I just read, of course, you always draw a blank on, so I'll ask you, but the new Ishiguro, Claire on the Sun, I thought was fabulous. I loved that. I thought that was a really, deeply intelligent and sort of magical book.
Didn't you think that Claire on the Sun, isn't it so interesting how each of his books seems so different on the surface, and yet they all kind of are linked together on the inside? I mean, in some ways, like you see that in your books as well. But I love trying to find the hidden links in a literary writer. Like what are the things that you're always trying to write about underneath?
I always say that my plot line is how people start off stupid and shallow, and they come to a kind of deepening through the suffering brought about by experience. I mean, I'm always writing some angle on that, no matter what else I think I'm writing.
Yeah. So somebody once said famously, and I think I'm a big adherent on this, is that the only plot there is the loss of illusions. Which is a pithy way of saying what Joan just said. But yeah, that, I thought the world was a certain way. It turned out I was wrong.
I think you were both pithy. Well, I think we are, I think like one of the people in the chat function, we're just going to take this all in. And I hope if you haven't read Secrets of Happiness, you get a copy from us, or for whatever. Folks come from all over the country, whatever independent bookstore you want. Go get it. You might tell them that Boswell had a really good event, and maybe they want to watch it, and maybe they'll read it too. We're so grateful for both of you. Continued success, and thank you everyone for coming to our event, because we wouldn't have a virtual bookstore without you. Hope to see you in another one. Thanks everybody.
Thanks everybody, and I will second Dan in terms of buying from Boswell Books if you can, because they ship anywhere, and especially in terms of Joan's work. Remember that Secrets of Happiness is just the most recent one, and there are a bunch of other fabulous books, Improvement and Fools and this Ideas of Heaven, et cetera, to get as well. I'm doing my official. I'm
plugs. Ready to start reading number 5. So, so they're addictive. So thank you all so much. Good night.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody.